I guess one thing that's very important, though, is that, we're getting further and further evidence of the accuracy and effectiveness of Iranian strikes on American bases. Again, thanks to the Chinese, they've been publishing these wonderful satellite photos. And one thing that we've seen, that there's all kinds of facilities have been destroyed on these bases. Yeah, but in particular, certain experts have pointed out that there are 4 high-end radars that are used for ballistic missile defense that cost upwards to $1 billion. There are only 13 in the world. 4 have been wiped out. That's, everything that the U.S. had in the Middle East. So the only remaining radar system of this sort is still in Israel. And I wouldn't be surprised that the Iranians get that too. So that is, that's very notable. So it shows that, they're not just firing blindly. They are targeting high value targets. They're taking them out. And doing real damage, to the military infrastructure of the U.S. there in the Persian Gulf. And that's a point in favor of the Iranians. Now, we know that the U.S. is continuing to hit, the U.S. and Israel is continuing to, again, wreak devastation. They've dropped, I don't know how many tons of bombs, but I think they claim that there have been, 3,000 sorties so far, maybe much more than that, I can't remember, but it's just been an enormous number of bombs have already been fired into Iran. And we've seen the damage. Now, the damage that we see is almost entirely civilian infrastructure. So that's terrible, for the civilians, of course. But again, as we pointed out earlier, that's not how you win a war. That's how you just strengthen the resolve of the other side. Again, hospitals have been struck. Of course, we know about the school, but other schools have been struck. Clinics, police stations, the most famous palace, World Heritage site was struck. Maybe that gives the Americans and the Israeli satisfaction, but it doesn't do anything for their war effort, right? Maybe they try to provide some kind of rationale for it. I know that they will, but it just doesn't. Now, we don't know, of course, they may be doing real damage. We've heard about more B-2 flights, attempts to destroy these, underground missile facilities that the Iranians have, and they go after launchers. And they certainly have hit some of them, but the photos that they've showed, my understanding is that the majority of them actually show decoys or even just images painted on the ground. But they're claiming that they've got most of them. I don't think they can know. Again, the Iranians have been preparing for this war for a long time, and I strongly suspect, I'm fairly confident, that they're not showing all their air defense now. That would just be foolish to put it all up on the ground for the Israelis and the Americans to go after. You can hide them. You can have, maybe we've only, they only put a tenth on the surface to start off with. And then when the Israelis and the Americans develop some kind of confidence and they begin flying into Iranian airspace, then you bring them out. And you can, you bring out another portion and you can start talking. That's my guess is what's going on there. I think that confidence that I'm hearing from Israeli officials in particular is probably misplaced, and that they're going to, that again, this Iranian air defense is far from over. So again, great damage. Like it's pretty much a continuation. We're on the same trajectory. One other incident I just want to mention, before giving it back to you is the sinking of an Iranian frigate, off the coast of Sri Lanka. And the reason that it was there is that it had been invited to take part in, the sailors took part in a military parade in India. They were there at the invitation of the Indian government. And it was because, they had come to India, that actually the frigate wasn't even loaded with weapons. It was unarmed. and it was shot. It was sunk by an American submarine off the coast of Sri Lanka. The Americans made no effort to save the survivors, and that's a long-standing, kind of rule of the sea, and it's part of kind of the rules of warfare that goes way back. Even even U-boats that took out American or British ships during the World War II would rescue the survivors. That was something that both sides would do for each other, but we didn't do it. And when I see that, when I hear about that, and I think about that incident, of course, that we saw in the Caribbean Sea, where we blew up one of these boats and then we killed the survivors. That really, I find that very, very disturbing. I mean, it really does seem to be a descent into barbarism on our part. And you hear this language that Pete Hegseth uses: no mercy, et cetera, et cetera. We're not going to be constrained. We're not going to wage a politically correct war. We're not woke soldiers, or this is a bunch of nonsense. It's just like, okay, yeah, I understand. I don't like what's generally understood as woke, but you have to be civilized. I mean, that's the thing. I don't understand. I don't like what's called political correctness either. But he's extended it to mean just having any kind of constraints on your own behavior. And that's terrifying. I mean, that's what we're seeing. Again, just go back to, all these attacks on civilian infrastructure. We're giving, it looks like to a great extent, we're giving Iran the Gaza treatment. Why blow up these residential buildings? Why blow up hospitals? 3 hospitals have been rendered inoperable. What's that all about? But that's, of course, what Israel has been doing in Gaza and to a lesser extent in Lebanon. And now it looks like we've joined in. It's kind of the IDF-ization of the U.S. military.
So you think that the behavior that we're seeing, the shocking behavior from the United States, is it largely because we have decided to follow Israel's lead? I mean, this idea of shooting an unarmed naval vessel and then just steaming off and leaving these sailors to drown, this is... like you said, the Nazis didn't do this.
Right. No, that's true. Yeah, I think it's fair to say, I go back, I think I mentioned this particular, event in my life in a previous podcast, probably long ago. But I remember a friend from my undergraduate days admitted to me, he was somebody who had served in the U.S. military, but that he got vicarious pleasure in the military actions of the IDF. We're talking about way back, the 1980s. And the IDF actually was much more civilized back then than it was. But even then, it had a reputation for kind of pushing the boundary of, of what was considered to be, acceptable forms of warfare. One thing is assassinations. That was something that the Israelis have been doing since really the very beginning. And our government would criticize them about that and criticize them all the way up until really 9/11. And then we began to do it too. And so now we see, we just took part in this assassination of Khamenei and other leaders, and there's just no talk about it. This is normal. This is the way we conduct war now. But there was a time when we didn't conduct that war that way. I mean, the Israelis were out in front on us. I remember again in the early 2000s, George W. Bush actually criticized the Israelis for collateral damage, for killing like 3 other people, when they went after one Hamas official. And he criticized them for that. That's nothing now. That's nothing. They go kill hundreds. They'll take out an entire apartment building to kill one guy, and nobody says anything. It's just become, I don't want to pin it all on the Israelis, because there's obviously, we could say no to it, but we have embraced it, and it's very, very ugly.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that long ago, like you said, George Bush was upset. So how did it devolve so quickly that we're at this stage right now where we kill 160 little girls in a girls' school? It seems like that was a U.S. strike is what it is looking like. Not hearing any apology.
Right.
shooting an unarmed naval vessel that was at the invitation of the Indian government to take in naval exercises, blowing it up as it's returning. It was there were a bunch of other countries were invited in this thing. It wasn't just like an Iranian, Indian thing either. And then steaming away, the unwritten mariner's code, you don't leave people
Right.
in the middle of the ocean to drown. It's insane. It's just, the behavior is shocking. It's like we're going out of our way to be the bad guy. It's only been a week since this war has been going on, and this is the behavior we're engaging in. And carpet bombing a city like Tehran is like, this is like what we're seeing, the Dresden type of behavior, where after World War II was raging for a long time and both sides going at it, then eventually they go to this level.
Right.
And the U.S. always used to use this language of we're doing surgical strikes. There's nothing surgical about what they're doing. What we're seeing is what it sounds like. You said Iran's missiles seem to be quite precise. It seems like Iran is trying to be surgical. The U.S., either we're not being surgical because we don't have the capability, or we just don't know where the targets are. So we're just in a fit of rage. We're just saying, like, look how tough we are. Look at this huge explosion. We blew up this huge building. Look at this ship we sank, and we just steamed off and let them all drown. That's what happens if you mess with America. It makes us look like monsters. But I think the idea was that somehow it makes us look tough and powerful. But I don't think the world is looking at it that way. Do you?
Yeah, well, I think most of the world, again, I don't know about our vassal states in Europe, but I think a lot of I'm sure, again, that many Europeans are shocked by this too, just not their leaders, with the notable exception of Sanchez. And I think as the president of Norway is also criticized, he hasn't done as much as Sanchez has. And the Irish are just not saying anything. They're keeping out of it. But everybody else is stepping forward and praising the Americans and the Israelis. But anyway, I think most of the world does see it. And it's really, horrifying to behold. It's not, what we're seeing. I think it's the implementation. It's actually the realization, of the kind of the language that Hegseth and Trump uses. It's this tough guy talk, and it's this real puerile chest thumping. Just you look at the name of the operation, Epic Fury. Yeah, so we blow things up. We just see billowing clouds of smoke and dust, and that's fury. Every time you do it, there's just a demonstration of our might, and it's just as again, as Hegseth says that. We rain death and destruction down from the sky. And, when a guy's down, we keep on punching him, right? We punch him when it's down. We don't care. It's a language that it's not the language of a civilized country. It isn't. It isn't. It's the language of thugs. Maybe even worse. I think one other area you can point to where we have, again, descended into barbarism is the question of torture. Now, that was just so very clear cut, again, before 9/11. You don't do that. That's something that, okay, maybe we carpet bomb cities from time to time, but we don't torture people. There's certain things that just we don't do. But I remember the very obvious public efforts to make torture acceptable, during the months and years following 9/11. And I think there was basically, what was there, a series called like 24? I can't remember. But anyway, it began to introduce the idea of torture. Now, torture might be necessary. And then it turned out, and we did engage in torture, and we also handed prisoners over to others who we knew were going to torture them. We became complicit and actively involved in torture. That our CIA did. There's no question about it, and that was a real change. Again, that was a descent into barbarism. Now I remember it was always like in the case of torture, it was justified. You say, well, there was this one scenario they put out, like that somebody. A terrorist has planted a nuclear bomb in some city, but you don't know where it is. You've got him. You have to find out within 24 hours. So you torture him. It's just like you have to do it. It's just like you're showing like we just, we can't be so-called politically correct or something. We just have to do that. Now, those kind of situations, first of all, just almost never exist. So it's a really a spurious justification for torture. And then in general, as many experts have pointed out, torture is not a good way to get, accurate information, because people will tell you anything under torture, and then they'll just tell you what you want to hear. They said, like, you got somebody, you think he might not have anything, but you torture him, he'll finally say something. He'll give you what you want. So it's not a good way. Good interrogators actually work hard at befriending people, starting to make the prisoner feel comfortable, and they're very skillful, and over time they can start to get information out of them. That's the way you really do it. That's a professional way. But we went towards torture, right? We began to tolerate it and more. We began to, actually carry it out. We tortured people. And you say, well, why? There's always a rationale. It's just like, Israel and now the U.S. just blowing up civilian infrastructure. You'll ask these people, they'll never say that they do, because we just like to kill Iranians or we like to kill Palestinians or something. They'll never say that. Well, some of them will, actually, in the case of Israel at least. But in general, like top government officials in general won't say that, right? In Israel, there are exceptions. Some of them are saying it, to be honest. But initially, they didn't say that. There's, this is just, this is a part of our doctrine. We know there's collateral damage, but we need to do this in order to pressure Hamas or to actually, to achieve our objectives in one way or another. It'll be rationalized. It's a means to an end. It's unfortunate, but we got to do it. But I think and that's the same thing that's used for the justification of torture. But I think in both cases, there's something else going on. It really doesn't work. You see it again and again that it doesn't work, but you do it. And I think you do it because you like it. I mean, there is a savage deep inside of, every one of us. But we learn, hopefully because of proper upbringing and so on and so forth, we learn to keep that savage down and, and to live a civilized, a decent life. But that these people, let that inner savage come out, and they like it. I think that's right. I think they like torture. They like killing civilians. I mean, that may seem like an extraordinary statement, but you just see it doesn't achieve any ends, but they do it, and they do it again and again. Often it actually has the exact opposite effect, like we've seen with the assassination of the top officials, the killing of the girls in the school or whatever. It has strengthened the resolve of the Iranians to resist. And that's very predictable.